Thank you very much. And lovely to see so many people here on this final slot. I was a bit worried when people with changeover happened that I might be looking at an empty auditorium, so it's great that we're so full. So thank you very much. As the slide behind me says, today talking about building supplier capability in the supplier journey. The context for that is that a key stakeholder, Fabrice touched on it earlier, it's come up in other sessions on both stages today. For a lot of sustainability, it's about engaging suppliers and supply chain to drive change. So I want to share some of our experience in that space around how to do that. It isn't simple, and as the slide says, it is a journey. So just a little bit more on me based on that introduction. You said I spent a lot of my time in manufacturing, so an engineer originally many years ago, worked with lots of companies, understand the practicalities of what's going on in supply chain. How it's not very simple when someone suddenly says, oh, just please change that packaging, or just please make whatever that change might be. So I did that for many years, and then I switched to the other side of the fence and started advising some of the world's largest retailers as a consultant, and then a supply pilot, and you see some of those clients listed across the bottom of the slide. Also proud to be recently alumnus of the University of Cambridge's CISL. I know some of my fellow alumni are in the room here today, because what those years taught me is the power of engaging all of those suppliers to drive change. And how do we do that at Supply Pilot? Contextually, helping a company engage its suppliers with its brand, its strategy. That's really important. Again, Fabrice talked about the power of using brands, and it's not about what Reckitt's do, it's each brand has got their own SDGs that they focus on. So how do you get people to believe behind that? How do you collect the data you need from them to inform and drive and measure change? And then ultimately, how do you build the capability around that? So that's us. So why does this matter to business? It might be an odd thing that's there, but ultimately, I talk about this elsewhere, blog about this. There's lots of talk about sustainability and saving the planet and what it means to people, etc. But if we're trying to drive change within supply chains, we need to relate to people in the sense of what does it mean to them and their business. They've got to go to their CEO to get some change, go to their CFO and ask for money. And this quite stark statistic, I don't know how many people saw it earlier in the year from PwC, but it's a recent one, which is 55% of GDP is at risk from climate. So yes, hopefully everybody sat in the room here is worried about what happens to the planet, what happens to people, but ultimately, if we want to be in business in the years to come, we've got to understand this. And for most people, retail, CPG, manufacturing, companies such as Reckitt, 80% of their impact is in their supply chain. So you're not going to address that risk without working with your supply chain. And 99% of the complexity is in the supply chain. It's really easy, by comparison, to look at the things within your own four walls, but when you've got hundreds or thousands of suppliers and thousands of materials, that's where the complexity comes. And it's in that context that really I'd encourage you to be looking at those changes as a journey. Depending on how difficult it is, that journey could be an assault course. But like any journey, as the proverb says, the longest journey starts with that first step. And that first step is getting suppliers to want to come on that journey, to understand where you're trying to go, to understand what you're trying to achieve. So, really simply, you're there at the start point, looking at what are all the different things that could impact on your business. I'm a huge believer that we run the risk with it to talk about net zero of being too focused on carbon, solely carbon, carbon tunnel vision as the Stockholm Institute calls it. So look more broadly, but start with your suppliers to start with why. If anyone's read Simon Sinek, the principles to start with why for a business, exactly the same in communicating with your suppliers and those stakeholders. Again, we've talked about stakeholder engagement already. A real simple example for me when this went wrong here in the UK was on the back of Blue Planet. There was a huge rush away from black plastic. All sorts of pledges were made. Policy was driven by Twitter, as it was called back then. And fundamentally, there was nothing wrong with the black plastic. It was recyclable, it was reusable. The issue was people didn't know how to manage that. But the race away from black plastic actually removed the destination for a lot of coloured plastics that could only be recycled into black plastic. So we just pushed the problem somewhere else. So unlocking the engagement with suppliers is also about informed choice rather than sometimes quick steps and unintended consequences. So set off on a journey. First step in that journey for us is that ultimately you need to understand where your suppliers are in their journey. We call it a kickstart assessment. It depends, doesn't matter what you call it. Ultimately, where are they today? What's their understanding? What's their readiness? What's their comprehension of the issue? What are the barriers that they face? Too many people write a sustainability strategy without first understanding where those suppliers are. And if it's 80% of the impact and some 90% of the complexity, how can that be done absent of that? And GSK, they did an assessment of their top 300 suppliers. So obviously the larger companies expect to be aware. And about a third of those basically went, climate what? I really don't understand. So actually, it's really dangerous to assume that people understand what's required of them and where this is going. So when we're doing this, we recommend people to look beyond carbon, look across a number of different pillars. Our own Kickstart assessment focused on these 6 pillars because they cover most of the areas that are related to a supply chain. We did this in working with our advisory group, so we had people that came from Kingfisher Group, which is the likes of B&Q, Walgreens Boots, a cross-section of food, retail apparel. Because when you ask these questions, it also really helps with that engagement. A lot of suppliers don't necessarily know how they can solve an issue related to carbon, but they might know how they can swap something to be a more sustainable material, which probably actually reduces carbon, but they don't necessarily see it that way. So it's a much richer conversation, if you're going to start, is actually by understanding where suppliers are on a much more broad area. It also relates it to them and the products and the materials that they're supplying to you. There's a danger when talking about carbon and reporting that it seems a bit intangible, necessarily directly related to the products. But also importantly, if we want to get people to change, another piece of research this year is that the number one thing that customers rate most importantly is sustainable products and packaging. They struggle to put a value on someone who's made a pledge to 2030 or 2040, etc. So that's the same engaging with suppliers. Actually, it's what can I change today that's going to impact our lives today, impact my family, impact my friends that we can talk about. Lovely examples like not pre-rinsing your washing up. So understanding capabilities is a bit like a game of top trumps and really understanding who's there, who's got what strengths, who's got what weaknesses. How can you understand that scope of the challenges, but also the opportunities? There's a really good example actually at a previous event. A well-known food brand had basically adopted a certification, communicated to all of their suppliers that we're going to go with this certification, and then had an inbox inundated with suppliers going, no thank you, don't want to work with you anymore then. And it's because they'd not taken the time to understand the more qualitative approach of where suppliers were on that journey. Certain suppliers felt that certification was redundant because it was basically just meeting legislation in their home country, so why did they need another certification they had to pay for? Others were saying, well, I've actually already got a different certification that covers that capability. So part of understanding where suppliers are is what they've already done, so you can tap into that to accelerate change rather than trying to push a burden down onto the supply chain. And if it's seen as a burden being pushed down on the supply chain, engagement will fail, sadly. So I get all of these answers, and I spread them out and I work out what I'm trying to do. The richer the view, the better. One of the big mistakes that we see people make is a Pareto approach to this, where they say, well, I'm going to go and talk to my top X% of suppliers. Pareto has a clear place in all of this, which is, where are you going to spend your time? Clearly, it's with those people who can have the greatest impact. But actually, you need to bring all of your suppliers on this journey. If it's going to take the Coca-Colas of this world till 2040 to be carbon zero, what about the Ma and Pa shops who haven't actually started yet and don't have the resources? So we're going to bring everybody on the journey, but also we've learned over the years, so much of the innovation actually comes from the smaller companies that aren't constrained, that don't have the same policies and processes and actually can turn up and say, well, what about this? Let's do something differently. Last year I spoke more on this, so I'm going to skip over a little bit, but that engaging everybody relates to marginal gain theory. So any sports people in the room, that was made famous by Sir David Brailsford, the GB Olympic coach, who basically took everything about cycling right back down to its basics and went, I can't change the bike, I can't change human physiology, but I can make the helmets 1% less friction, or the wheels 1% less friction. The one I love was by cleaning the support van, they actually made the bikes faster, because the dust in the support van, they could actually measure the impact. If you can engage everybody, and the talk is still available if anybody wants to scan or take a picture of that, it's available to view, of how getting all of those people is going to help you drive change. So when you've got them, the next thing we encourage is, now you've got that data, it's really important to break those people into cohorts. I can't tell you what the cohorts will be, because ultimately the whole point about Kickstart is understand where they are. Yeah? If everybody's already got science-based targets and they really understand this, life's easy. Yeah? If 90% of them can't spell GHG, it's a bit of a different problem. So break them into these who really do need education at one end, who need more capability building in this, and those who actually have the understanding can really drive and work impact, and communicate with them differently. Just as you would in marketing communicate to different personas for your customers, look at these as different personas that you're building in your supply chain. So once you've got that, you bring it to life. So it doesn't have to be 3, it's as many different personas as you want, that you break into those different categories so you can reduce the complexity down to what they can relate to. You meet them where they are. If I go back to this analogy of a journey, right, then ultimately I need to get somebody off the start line, and I'm not going to do that by scaring them what's years down the line. I've got to take them down that journey. And people like ourselves exist to provide the tools to help you do that at scale when you've got hundreds or thousands of suppliers. When I talk about building capabilities, a lot of it's about education. You cannot underestimate the capability building of actually saying, I'm going to share some simple good practice with you, and it could be any SDG, any element of ESG. I'm pleased to say, for example, we work with Woolworths in Australia, the largest retailer in Australia, who recently won an award as the #1 retailer for what they do around human rights in their supply chain. We're only one small part of that solution, but ultimately the educational tools to their suppliers of here are the things you can do differently, not just in your business, but down to your next step in the supply chain, is an important part of that capability building, and that voice of supplier is something that Woolworths passionately believe in to drive a change. I'm also a big believer you can't make suppliers pay to play. If you're standing there saying, well, here's a vision, we really need to do this, oh, by the way, you need to pay for this new platform and do that and this other. It's a bit, it's a bit like proposing and say, but you must buy the ring and you're buying dinner. It's just not quite right. So ultimately, that capability building, but it's for your strategy and informed by your assessment of where your suppliers are. Yeah, give them that next step up from where they are in their own journey. Collecting data is clearly a very, very important part. It was second bullet in terms of what we do, but we need data-driven change. We need to understand what's the recycled content in plastics, what are the certain chemicals, is this wood FSC certified, whatever that might be. But we talk a lot about 3 pillars of good supplier engagement. Communication, that's the why, which I'm going to do a bit more in a moment. Transparency, which is how am I doing? How am I getting on? And then that support and that capability build. So what do I need to do? How am I doing? How do I get better? Communication, transparency, support. Doesn't matter how big a business you've got, if you've nothing else you take today is those 3 pillars, please do. That central pillar about transparency is really important. What is the yardstick by which you're measuring that supplier, and therefore be transparent? So a big part of what we do isn't just collecting data, but it's making sure that when that's been turned into the relevant reporting, that's echoed back to suppliers in a way that they know exactly where they are, they know exactly what the lift is. How you choose to then peer rank them, etc., is up to yourself. But ultimately, it's really important that they know how they're being measured. The old adage of measure it and it will improve will come in. And if you share the right metrics with suppliers, then with nothing other than sharing those right metrics with the right why, we always see double-digit percentage improvements, because your success is their success if they're your suppliers. Got a very simple equation. Not going to do anything too heavy this side of lunch. But one of the big mistakes people make at this point is, I'm going to buy a platform, buy this piece of software, and it's all going to get fixed. Wrong. Ultimately, there is no element of build it and they will come. You've got to have the people. You've got to have the people to drive that platform and get the engagement, etc. And obviously, again, companies like ourselves can help you in areas like that. But you've got to get the suppliers to come to that. So the equation, which actually was given to us by a client, but I think it was beautiful, is basically you take that people and platform, but ultimately you magnify that by engagement to deliver your impact. And the important bit in the middle of that is engagement. So, I say, you can't just build in, they will come. You've got to get people to want to engage with the platform. You've got many, many suppliers, hopefully, if you're listening to this talk. We've touched on marginal gain theory. So I want to engage them. Please, please, please make sure that engagement is about impact, not just about reporting. No supplier is going to get excited about filling spreadsheets to help you do reporting. Right? They can get excited because they are also humans living on this one planet we've got, about actually how we can make a positive impact. I was really pleased that Fabrice, as part of that stakeholder engagement, also talked about risk. So I said, top of the thing, why is this important to business? Well, it's important to business because risk. If I actually don't worry about responsible source materials, I might not be able to buy what I need. Right? We saw the 55% of GDP. If I don't follow legislation, so we've got things like, excuse me, PFAS legislation making chemicals illegal, deforestation legislation in terms of wood products, etc. If I'm slow to the party, there aren't going to be enough of the right materials for me to buy. So I need to get ahead of that and understand, work with my suppliers to make sure we've got those green supplies. When you engage them about the fact that ultimately they might not be able to supply you in 2 years if you don't address this, I guarantee you will have a much better, more fruitful conversation than if you're just talking about trying to report. Because if you can engage them about the risks, by definition, you have to engage them about the impact of how they make a difference, risk assess those different issues, come up with specific plans of how they're going to deliver change. But it becomes very tangible. In many cases, I'd even say it's common sense. It's just opening the door to that common sense conversation about how can I swap this, how can I remove that. So, engage your suppliers about risk, not reporting. Empower your suppliers about the impact that can be had, not reporting. Right? I want to share this. It's derived from a model that Sarah Flynn's done, details on the slide. For me, this is really, really important, and it's very basic, and it works with internal engagement as well. Is that basically we start on the left with people in action. I'm trying to get them to move. I want to move them to the right. I need them to come and make this change, right? The problem is that if all I do is push them to move with you must do this by this date, too much stick, not enough carrot, then I ultimately get that movement without resonance, and therefore I don't sustain the action. I'm constantly having to chase my suppliers. I get poor participation. Many of our clients, before we work with them, are getting 30, 40% response rates from their suppliers. But there's no resilience. I've not really changed anything because I'll move the dial until I turn the other way, and then everyone takes their foot back off the gas. It goes back to where we were. So the important is, set your intention. What does success look like? What are we trying to achieve? Don't mandate why. Go back to my black plastic example. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to say, I want to eliminate single-use plastics. But you're the expert of supplying me, whatever it is that you're doing. I want you to tell me how we're going to achieve that, rather than me trying to mandate that. So you also now have a chosen path. And a chosen path is always more successful than an enforced path. So what is the outcome you're looking for, not necessarily the how? What is it we're trying to achieve? And if that's tied to your brand, again, I'm so pleased I followed Fabrice on this with some of his comments. If that's tied to your brand, that's tied to your brand success, which means it's tied to your supplier success. So they're going to want to help this to mitigate risk, but ultimately your success is their success. So rather than going straight to action, The path to action is via resonance. The first step is this starting with why. Where are we going, guys? What are we trying to achieve? Why is this good? Your business is going to be a low risk, my business is going to be a low risk. Our customer going to be happier, I'm going to do more of this, you're going to sell me more. Then, by taking that path, I can have action with resonance, which by definition is the opposite of what we saw before. So I can get high participation. We consistently get high 90% engagement when we're working with suppliers, getting them to provide information, do the training, get involved, understand the impact. I can do it at more pace because people are bought into where we're trying to do. I've got more resilience to that. So this journey or assault course, they will stay the course because they believe in where they're going. Right? It might be because they have to do it, but they have to do it not just when told, but because they understand the risks to their business or the opportunities to their business. And ultimately, therefore, I have the maximum impact. Everybody wins. That's the big difference compared to when we're taking a reporting thing. You know, I'm going to talk to you, and pick on you. I'm going to talk to you, and I want to do reporting, and you're going to have to do this, and I'm going to pay for this platform, and I'm going to talk to you about spend-based analysis on my carbon footprint, and now you're scared that that means price reductions because it's all tied to spend. The whole narrative's been set off on the wrong foot. Whereas ultimately we say, well, we've decided we're going to remove these materials. That's good for all of these different reasons, ticks off these 6 SDGs. Our clients are going to love it, our shareholders are going to love it, we're going to be more successful, you've got less risk, and you're going to supply a business that's going to be doing more of the same. So I'm not going to get into issues of consumption versus sustainability, that's for another day. But fundamentally, in business terms, it's a win-win. So 3 takeaways from that. Meet your suppliers where they are on the journey. You've got to start with some kind of kickstart assessment, understand where they are against the goals that matter to your strategy and the risk and the opportunities for their business. When you've done that, it allows you to start that journey with why. Why are we going this way? So they want to come on the journey with you. Any of you with toddlers, yeah, it's that, you want them to walk that way, don't you? You don't have to drag them or bribe them down the thing. So it's actually start with why, make them want to do it to achieve that win-win, and invest in that capability building. As I say, do not make them pay to play. This is your brand you're trying to drive forward. It's your business you're trying to drive forward. Invest in them just as you would your own staff that says, I want you to have the capability to come with you on this journey. If you've understood one and they've joined you on number 2, it's only a fair trade-off that you're now going to provide them the skills to do, service to do that. Engaging all suppliers, not just the Pareto approach. Use tools that allow you to engage everybody, but still put your effort into the minority that might have the greatest impact, but bring them all on that journey. So remember this equation. I saw some of you taking the picture earlier, that ultimately if you can get those people and platforms together, maximize that impact by starting with why, then you can have the maximum impact. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, James. Really great session. Love all your graphics. There's been a lot of work gone into that PowerPoint as well. Are there any questions from the audience? We are going to bring a microphone around. At the front here. Yes, could we have the microphone out? Just at the front here. If you just please state your name and where you're from, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Marie. I'm from the company called Mills Professional. So we are a grain business management, so we're a sustainable company. I just wanted to ask, he did mention about the 3 pilot. I didn't really kind of grab it. Can you give me a bit more details on your 3 pilot?
Sorry, I'm not sure I caught
the 3 pilot that you was...
The 3 pillars
yeah,
of...
yeah.
So communication, transparency and support. So if you look at it from a supplier's perspective, good supplier engagement is always done from a supplier perspective. What do I need to do and why?
Yeah.
So what's the outcome? Not necessarily what's the outcome we're trying to get? How am I then doing against that? So, have I got 50% of my products are right, 20% of my products are right, etc. And then the support to get there. So communication, transparency and support.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll take one more if we just pass the mic down. Thank you.
Hi, Nicola Stocks from Simply Sustainable, ESG and sustainability consultancy to large brands. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's an amazing platform, really fantastic, and we'll be sharing it with our clients.
Thank you.
I just wondered what you felt the importance, or is there an importance or trend between sort of, let's just call it sustainability-linked supplier contracts?
There are, but I think there's a real risk that they're coming from too much of the compliance risk management end. So I won't name the retailer, but there's a US retailer who basically issued, for all of their own brand products, packaging mandate. All of the packaging must meet these rules, right? So I asked them the question in an event like this: how are you bringing your suppliers on the journey? He said, well, we're not. We just communicate the rules. We're not going to buy from them if they don't. So does that mean you're not going to sell any potato chips, which is what they call crisps over there? Because ultimately, it's one of those packs, we all know it's quite difficult. The metallized, unless you can take it back to a local store, it's certainly not curbside recyclable. None of their suppliers have got an answer. So what's really going to happen in 2 years' time? Are they going to just have an empty aisle in their store? So I think there's a real example of someone going, well, I can do this through policies, sustainable contracts, etc. But actually, that's not going to deliver on the result. Whereas fundamentally, it's for me, and the work we do with those, I think those clients that embrace this most, is you want suppliers who are coming on the journey. Another client, their measure of success in terms of those sorts of contracts was, you must have a commitment in certain areas. I'm not going to ask you how you're measuring it. But you must have a policy that your board review in these areas, because if you're doing that, you'll get better. You're a supplier I want to work with. So they are coming in, but I fear too many of them are being used as a stick. Whereas, as we heard today, actually, if we want to drive real change, we've got to focus more on the carrot and the vision and the why.
It's interesting that, the large businesses are getting sustainability-linked loans, where actually the cost of borrowing money is reduced. But so it's a benefit to them, but actually it seems into contracts, it seems the opposite to supply chain.
There are better and worse examples, clearly, but I do think that more generally there'll be someone's mandated, you must use this platform to report this data, meet this policy, etc. And I am going to loan you some money, but ultimately, dear supplier, you're going to pick up most of the cost of this along the way. And so I think it just sets the wrong tenor for a lot of those discussions, and certainly, if you're not in the top echelon of those suppliers, that's very hard to stomach, and therefore we don't get the change that we need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question, and thank you, James. Another fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.